chair a little bit more in advance so that I can see you and yes, so I can see you a little bit. We were asked not to switch off the phones after we open them. So we open the microphones and they stay open all the time. This is what people ask.
Bene, i microfoni sono aperti, quindi direi che possiamo cominciare. Benvenute e benvenuti alla Masterclass di Cristian Mungiu. Siete tanti e penso che siate anche desiderosi di capire come è composto l'universo di Cristian Mungiu, che al suo interno ha tanti pianeti. C'è il cinema, che è quello che conosciamo di più tutti, ma esiste anche la scrittura, la letteratura. Ha da poco pubblicato questo bellissimo libro, Una vita romena per la nave di Teseo, e poi c'è la fotografia, la casa di produzione, un festival, quindi il suo percorso creativo e poetico è molto sfaccettato. Direi di cominciare dall'inizio, e cioè come tutto è cominciato e quando hai incontrato il cinema.
Come tutto è cominciato? Well, first of all, I want to say something before we start. A masterclass is a very big name. I don't like using this term as a masterclass. I'm very happy that we have the opportunity to just talk. It's a bit more difficult to meet everybody in turns, so I'm very happy whenever I have this opportunity of having a friendly conversation. And ideally, I'd like to keep this as a dialogue, so I'm going to speak about a lot of things, but whenever you feel like asking any kind of questions, not the boring things that I'm going to say, just ask me. To put it shortly, you know, there's something about the biography of filmmakers that remember precisely this moment when they have started. Like I was taking a shower and all of a sudden, you know, this idea struck me. I went to see Cinema Paradiso, and it was not at all like this for me, in the sense that I wasn't thinking, you know, I started thinking about storytelling first, not about cinema. So yes, I do recall now that I think about this a moment at around the age of 10, 12, something like this, when I realized that the world was very interesting for me and I like telling stories about it. And also because it's a little bit connected with my family, in the sense that I come from a family where everybody was talking a lot. My father was talking, my mother was talking, my sister was talking, so, and I was the youngest in the family, so there was no room for me to talk. You know, so I said, okay, if I can't talk, but I have so many things to say, I better, you know, prepare them for later on and try to put them on paper. So sometimes, let's say around that age, I started writing, first of all. And little by little, you know, this idea that maybe I might use my talent to tell stories about how interesting the world around me is, could turn me into a writer. But, you know, yet again, I speak about the 70s and 80s here. And during that period, the focus of anybody living in the Eastern Bloc was not about cinema. And as I got to become, you know, closer to graduating the school, we were having these conversations with our parents, and my sister and I were very humanistic, let's say, driven people. She wanted to be a journalist and a playwright, and I was thinking about writing. And on the other side, we had our parents who were telling you, hey, you know, you need to prepare for something useful in life. And the most important thing is not to go to the countryside, because the idea was that for boys, the most difficult thing was that unless you were getting into some university right after film school, you would have 18 months of very difficult army. So it wasn't anything poetical at the age of 16, 17, 18 about thinking what you would do in life. The only important thing was to make sure you get into some university so that you don't go to the army. So I wasn't thinking very seriously about the possibility of becoming a filmmaker, because technically it was not possible during that period. So I went and I studied letters. I went to a local university in my hometown and I studied literature. And I went to a local journal of students, and I started practicing my writing small things in prose, and also writing a lot of reportage about stuff, trying to continue this preoccupation for a form of storytelling with words. And then, something completely unexpected came into our lives, which was the fall of communism. We never expected in 1989 that communism would fall, and this flipped our lives completely. And, all of a sudden, my friends started asking me, so, sorry, but if you said that you wanted to, become a filmmaker and you like films this much, why don't you just go now and become a filmmaker? So eventually I spent 1 or 2 more years, because it was very, very interesting to be in the press then. It was the moment of truth after so many years of confiscated press by the communist propaganda. Being in the free press was very interesting. But eventually, at the end, I made this choice, and I said, okay, yes, if this, I mentioned this as my dream, I need to go and pursue my dream. It wasn't that easy, because I come from a town where I couldn't witness the history of cinema through films. So I discovered just the popular films that were coming in our regular cinemas. I didn't have any specific instruction whatsoever about what is the history of cinema. I'm not from Bucharest, so I could just see scarcely films from the history of cinema. And one day I decided to go to the film school, and I was having some sort of a bad luck and of a good luck. The bad luck was that, there were a lot of different attempts before they would put you into the film school. A lot of small exams, and I passed the first one, I passed the second one, I passed the third one, I passed the fourth one. And after a while they said, well, we don't know when the fifth one is going to be, so just relax and we will call you to get back. Okay. So I went home, but I didn't went home, all this is in Bucharest. I went home to my home in Iași, where I'm from. And a few days later, somebody called and said, okay, so we're having this exam today, the last exam, could you come? I said, yeah, but I need to take the train. I mean, like, I'm 7 hours from there. I said, you're not in Bucharest? No, you didn't tell me to wait in Bucharest. You just say, go home. So I went home. Okay, so they were like, okay, come anyway, and we'll see what we can do. And there was nothing they could do. So I lost the exam. And I went back home, and I did radio and television that year, and I was a teacher. And I went to the exam next year. And the next year when I got to the same exam, when I got to this exam, they were like, oh, this is the guy that we forgot to ask last year for the fifth. Okay, so this helped me a lot to pass the exam, because honestly, it's very difficult to know who is going to be good to become a filmmaker. I was asked several times to be part of this commission, and it's very difficult. I was accepted in the cinema school based on a test in which I had to watch a Kieslowski short piece of film from Decalogue, and there was a bee trying to escape from a glass of juice. And if you worked in press, if you read literature, and if you speak a lot, it's not difficult to lure the people through what you say. With words, it's very easy. But was I prepared to be a filmmaker or not? I have no idea. I wouldn't have included me into the film school. But something that I can say to my defense is that at least I was hardworking, I have to say. And I was hardworking in the idea that, in the film school, people get in and they all believe they are already artists and stuff like this. But whenever you needed to make a film, nobody was having the screenplay ready on time. I was having the screenplay ready on time, and not just one. I was having several. So, and the other important thing was that because I was a little bit older, I had graduated a film university before, and because the legislation in that period asked me to pay for this second thing, I was allowed to work. And this was very good, because I decided to work on the foreign films which were being shot in Romania as an assistant director. So my secondary school from 3 years or 4 years was to be on the set of a lot of French and American directors, and this was something on top. So by the time when I graduated, there was this, it was a new law of cinema, and there was this guy who came, a producer, at some point in the film school, and he said, okay, so now this new law allows us to produce short films, 1 per year, so who's having a short film screenplay ready? And from all my colleagues, I was having one. So, okay, yeah, let's take yours. And we applied to this national film competition, and we won. And after we won, he asked me, do you happen to have some others? I said, yeah, I have some others. And so for the first 2 years, because they were only giving one short film per year to produce, but for the first 2 years, it was just me winning all the short films because I was always prepared with the short stories that I was writing and turning them into films. So I started quite well. I said, okay, that's not bad. I could live from filmmaking right away. And then I decided, this is around the years 2000, that it's enough with short films. And it's, maybe time to move on, make like a feature film. And I was wondering if it's going to go as easy as it went with the short films. I wrote the screenplay for my first film, and I won. I was very, very happy. I won. But again, I was having just one obsession with that film. I really wanted that, the film reaches a big festival. Ideally, I was writing the chronicles that Magda here was writing about Cannes and about La Biennale and about Venice, and even if it was my first film, I really wanted to get there. But it proved to be a little bit more complicated because, getting the financing for your first film was just covering, let's say, somewhere 30–40% of the film, and it was not very clear how to get the rest. And then it was something very strange happening. I was walking one day on the street like this, and I saw this big poster saying, "Do you want Robert Redford to read your screenplay?" I said, yes, of course I want. I mean, sure, why not? But what do I need to do? And, actually it was an advertising for an international screenplay competition held by the local HBO in Romania. And I looked there at the terms, and it said that you needed to deliver a screenplay for this competition in 2 weeks' time. I said, well, 2 weeks, well, yeah, we have enough time. I went to a colleague of mine in the film school, and I said, well, can we write a screenplay in 2 weeks? What do you think? I said, yeah, okay, sure, let's try. So, we wrote that screenplay, we submitted that screenplay. There were 500 screenplays. But yet again, in like 30 days from then, we won. And we were very happy, not because winning, but because there was an award, which was a very funny award. There was an award of 1,000 euros. Half of it was a prize in cash, so you would be given 500 euros, and the other was a trip to LA. And I got my 500 euros, and this was the diploma of this competition. It was very funny. It was a bill of 500 euros, plastified like this. Okay, but what was interesting, it was this part with the trip, because we were quite young. It was the years 2000, and because I was having this funny idea that if I go to US, I might run into a producer and I might find the money for this first film and complete the budget. And you have this romantic ideas that producers are these people with loads of money on them. You might get into one and just convince him on the spot that you have a great idea. So at some point we flew across the ocean. And all of a sudden, we were in the middle of a small community. We understood that it was a competition from screenplays from Eastern Europe, organized by some LA foundation. And when they saw us, they were on the point of just falling off their chair. They never expected that somebody from Eastern Europe would come. Actually, it was a misunderstanding. This was open for the community of Eastern Europeans living in LA. But the only person getting this wrong and really organizing a competition were the Romanian side of HBO. But okay, we were happy to be there anyway. And they started introducing to us, Hollywood. They took us to Writers Guild of America, Directors Guild of America. They pulled off the curtain so that we see the Hollywood sign on the hill. So I said, well, it's not bad. It's nice here. And we were very naive and very much at the beginning. I remember I was with this friend of mine from the film school, Ioana, and we were walking on the Sunset Boulevard. We were like, do you realize where we are? This is Sunset Boulevard. And everybody was, just trying to, there were a lot of horns. We were the only stupid guy to walk there. It's just for cars, you won't walk there and look around. So little by little, we started understanding a little bit of having a feeling about how LA looked for us. First of all, I bumped into this guy who was a producer. So, okay, he was a producer. He was a so-called Romanian producer, moved to LA, and I started telling him, I said, look, so I came here with this project that I'm having. This is my first film. And, you know, eventually I'm looking for somebody that could put some money into this film, make a film. And he asked me, what kind of a film this is? I said, what do you mean? I mean, in terms of genre. Is it an action adventure or romantic comedy? I have no idea. I don't think in terms of genre. I mean, it's a personal story that happened to me about how people of my generation just leave Romania, so I feel very much lonely at home. I said, well, no, it wouldn't work here. But how much money do you have? I said, I don't know, 300 Deutsche Marks. So 300 Deutsche Marks, well, you know, there's something with the 700 that I have, I think we could do this TV pilot that I want to shoot in Bahamas. I said, no, whoa, it's the other way around. I want to come here to find money from here to make my film back home. I said, no, that won't happen here. You know, it's the wrong place. So, okay. So if it's the wrong place, what can I do? And I started talking to these people from the community of Eastern Europeans. And I met, you know, directors from former Yugoslavia, from the Czech Republic, from South America, very many people who, you know, they just followed their dream of coming there to make it in the big American cinema, and they were very nice, but none of them was working. Some of them were paid, some of them have been paid for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years in a row. They have brought their families, they had a lot of films that they did back home, but none of them was working there. So I started having some second thoughts about this, and at some point, you know, I was talking to this friend of mine and said, well, I'm not that sure that this is, you know, the fulfillment of our dream. Maybe we should just get back home and start it from there. And here we had very different opinions. You know, this friend of mine, Ioana, she said, no, you don't understand. This is where it is happening. This is, the film only exists here. The rest is just subtitle cinema. So, and we went, yeah, and this is it. I mean, there are just two kinds of films, American films and subtitled films. So we just went to UCLA, and she got all the curricula, what she has to do if she wanted to go there and go to the university there. She has graduated 2 universities before, while I was a little bit skeptical. Meanwhile, the result, the outcome of our competition was a bit funny, because it was a competition for Eastern Europe, but the winning project was from Mexico. So that was a bit strange in our minds, and so we went to it's the first time when we met a script doctor. So we just, and the script doctor came and she talked a little bit with us, and she was just speaking about 3 projects from, I don't know, the 10 projects that were submitted. And, you know, we were quite sad. And then we went to talk to her and say, well, you know, it's not important that we haven't won or anything, but we wish to know something about the screenplay. How was the screenplay? And she told us, well, I was just paid to read these 3 winning screenplays, that's all. So actually nobody has read what we sent there, and we learned that this was, you know, more or less a foundation trying to just find money in the Eastern European communities in LA to keep on surviving. So I was quite disappointed at the end. And we make very different choices after this trip. We got back home, and I said, okay, I'm going to go back home, make my film, and make sure that the next time when I fly here, I will fly when people know who I am. For now, I have a film to make, I go back home. My colleague, she decided to get back home. She learned 1 year. She passed the exam to USC, and she did the film school again, and she became a film scholar in US. But in terms of producing, I produced her first film 20 years later, still in Romania. She never made it in US because, as you know, it's not like this. It's not that if you make the school there, people are waiting you with your arms open to have a career there.
Allora, abbiamo capito che gli inizi sono stati abbastanza avventurosi, e anche che la famiglia Mungiu continua ad amare parlare. Però finalmente arriviamo al tuo film di esordio. Quindi come sei riuscito a realizzarlo?
I'm sorry, the answer will be as long, I think. I'm not sure. Yes, because this is a long story as well. So I came back and I decided to make this first film of mine, and to, you know, I was talking to my cinematographer. I chose a cinematographer which was a little bit older, more experimented for this film, and I was telling him all the time, you know, we need to make this film, and I want to get with this film, ideally, to Cannes. And he was like, First of all, just make sure that you manage to film. You don't have the money, manage to finish the film, have a good film. Don't think about, such things. I say, no, I'm not thinking about this, but let's try. And the idea was that time was passing, and we couldn't find the rest of the money to make the film. We needed to make some choices. And like, all filmmakers in this situation, I said, you know what? Let's start shooting with the money that we have, because if not, we're going to lose them, and we'll see what will happen. And what do you think had happened? Well, the money ran out, of course, in the middle of the shooting. What could happen? Nothing else. So I think we were having some 7 more days of shooting, and there was no solution. So I just went back home, and I got all the cash that I was having, and I managed to talk to people to just postpone some of the things we needed to pay to just finish the shooting. So somehow we managed to finish the shooting, and then we started a long way of looking for solutions. And this is the beginning of internet, so it's before the mobile phone, so just to put things in context. And I found a festival in Rotterdam who was giving money for the third world countries, and we were very happily a third world country then, so we could get some money. But they had a lot of applications, and I said, okay, let's try here. And I did like, what a photojournalist, so I took the pictures from the film, and I did like a booklet like this, and I submitted this. It was not asked, but it was a way of seeing the films because I had shot and reading this, so you could see. And we were among the 5 projects that got the money from the hundreds of applications, and so we were very happy. But the issue was that with this money we could continue later on to edit the film, to pay the debts, to pay the film, but there was a catch about getting this money from Rotterdam. They asked for the film to be as a premiere in their festival, and I was so disappointed. I said, okay, I mean, these people are lovely, but my dream of getting to Cannes is not going to be fulfilled, but at least I will have the film and it's going to be to a festival. And time was running out, and we realized that we couldn't finish the money with the amount that we got from them, and we couldn't find other money. So, what happened is that the Rotterdam Film Festival started. We were trying to find a solution, and we couldn't. So the film was not ready, and so we had to tell them, I'm very, very sorry, the film is in the catalog, but we couldn't find the rest of the money, so we won't be ready on time. And they were very understanding. I said, well, too bad, whatever, this is it. But once again, it happened that it helped that the film was in the catalog. Just looking through the catalog, seeing what films are there, there was this lady who was the selector of Kenzen, the réalisateur, and I had no idea, but she had seen my short films in festivals before, and she was kind of following me. So she saw the film there and said, oh, I was really following this guy. I'm very happy that he managed to make his first film, and to be here in your festival is great for him. I wish that I invite him to Kenzen, but at least he's here. And they said, no, he's here just in the catalog. You can maybe invite him because he's not here with the film. So I got this phone call from them saying, well, if ever you finish the film and you wish to submit it to us, please. And I said, well, I would like to, but I don't know how to finish the film. And I negotiated with them saying, look, could you like tell me informally that if we finish the film, you would consider it, because Romania hasn't got a film in Kenzen for a long while, and I will try to do something with this information. And I said, yeah, sure, no longer it's informal. So I went to our National Film Center. I said, look, we might have a film in Cannes again on condition that I can finish it. So would you give me the money to finish this film? I said, okay, whatever, you give us back the film, so the film belongs to the National Center of Cinema, and get the money and finish it. Oh, we were so happy to do this. Of course, it was not my decision, it was the decision of my producer, but my producer was just the husband of a good friend of mine. She was a director, and he was among the first people who created a company where he could make films, but actually he was doing something else. He was selling just dirt for flowers, for soil for flowers. This was his business. But since his wife was a filmmaker, he just added, filmmaking into this company. But he had no idea about this. And he said, yeah, I won't make money with the film, just do whatever, give it back to the CNC and let's go on. So, and we continued being very naive. We were trying to finish the film with this money, and we specifically asked to be programmed at the end of the festival, just to make sure that we finish the film, everything is subtitled and so on. So eventually, we went to Cannes, we were selected. We haven't even, I was speaking to Thierry Fremont later on, and I said, we never even submitted the film to the real Cannes Film Festival because we considered nobody will watch it. So we went to Cannes and we went to the festival and we were astounded. You know, where are we here? And everything was mesmerizing, from the people you saw on the street to the palm trees. And our CNC had, you know, they found us, we were living 8 people in one room, 40 kilometers from Cannes. Me as a director and, you know, everybody from the crew. But we were very happy even like this, you know. And what happened there is that we realized how little prepared we was for this big experience. People were asking, so who is your sales agent? We had no idea what a sales agent is. Because nobody in Romania had this idea of a sales agent, and that the life of the film starts after you make the film. For us, it was very simple. I give the money, finish the film, that's the end of it. But, you know, so I said, what is a sales agent? You know, somebody who would sell the film from now on. And who is your press attaché? The press attaché? I have no idea what a press attaché is. And, you know, it was a bit embarrassing because the film was nice. The film was on a short list of Camera d'Or. We were told to stay. But when we got there at the end of the festival, there wasn't too much press left. There weren't too many buyers left. Everybody has left. But still, there were some people who liked the film. And they started coming to us directly saying, there was somebody from Italy, I remember very well, from Rai Uno. And they came and they said, oh, I like this. It's a wonderful comedy. How much do you want for this film? And my producer was like, no, it's fine. It's just it's method acting, you know. And so he did like this, and he just literally ran away. I said, what have you done? And he was like, sorry, but I didn't know if to ask 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000 euros. So he just, you know, ran away. Okay. And we ended up by not selling the film to anybody because we really didn't know. We had no idea how to do this. Not, you know. So, and finally, it was very funny because my dream of going to Cannes was fulfilled. We started hoping that we would get the Camera d'Or. We didn't, but this was a good motivation as well. It was a short list of people for this Camera d'Or. It was me, Carlos Reigadas, and the French directress. She won. But I met Carlos in Cannes 4 times already now in these 25 years. That girl never made a second film. So all in all, I think it was a good motivation for what followed.
Bene, non è solo un grande regista, un grande narratore di avventure, anche un grande attore.
I will tell you something which was not foreseen. You know, one of my decisions of staying back home to Romania, which was not planned to tell you today, but you know, I decided that it's better for me to stay back home, and this brought me a lot of very strange experiences. One of them was that, you know, when I was coming one day from a festival with this first film of mine, I was getting back from Korea, so I didn't have a signal. When I opened my telephone, I got a lot of messages. And the messages were that, please come quickly to Romania. There's somebody from US who wishes to work with you. I said, yeah, with me? Okay, well, why not? So, and it was this great American actor called Dennis Hopper. You know, he got, at the end of his life, he was doing a lot of shitty films, like B films, C films. He was shooting in Romania, some, you know. He has been married 4 times, and 5 times. So he was paying 4 different pensions, alimonies for his wife, some 20,000 euros just for his wife a month. So he had to work a lot. And this is why he was doing whatever kind of film. And, you know, spending time in Romania with his films for a long while. She came across a screenplay that some Mexican-American guy living in Bucharest gave to him for an opinion, and he said, well, this is very interesting. I would like to make this as a film. I haven't made a film in years. So he spoke with his producer from this Romanian film saying, well, you know, if I want to make this film, would you help me out? And that guy read the screenplay, and the screenplay was about the Romanian Revolution. And, you know, you don't want a Mexican to write about the Romanian Revolution, you know. So this guy, the producer, told him, you know, it's okay, but you need a writer. You need a writer that could write in English, but from a Romanian perspective. And you know, Hopper asked, oh, would you recommend me a writer that could do this? And this guy was like, okay, let me see in my agenda. I said, well, I thought maybe this guy. But, you know, he was not having anybody, of course, in his agenda because there are no writers in English in Romania, just, you know, in case. But he was among the people who had sent me to LA with that first screenplay. So he was having my screenplay in English just by accident. And he said, well, maybe this guy. So, you know, I met Hopper, and 2 days later, Hopper saw my film, and I talked to him, and he was like, okay, so I'm leaving on Monday, but this was a Thursday. Could you come with me and we write this in it? I said, well, you know, I need a visa. It's not going like that. Ah, no, I'm going to call the American embassy. And, you know, I was not there on Monday, but indeed, when I got to the American embassy to get my visa, everybody was like, oh, Dennis Hopper called for this guy, let's give him a visa. So I flew there, and it was a very interesting experience, my longest period in US. I was spending 3 or 4 weeks at his house in Wilmington, North Carolina. He was splitting the day into 3 parts. In the morning, he was playing golf. He was a big golfer. In the afternoon, he was spending time with one of his children that he was just having for 2 weeks in the year. And in the evening, he was writing with us. And, you know, the stories that he was telling were way better than our experience about working. And he was using this method acting very much sorry, to impress you. And he was, you know, coming in and out that thing all the time, just telling, you know, I was talking to him, said, hey, this is very interesting stories that you're having, and you should write them down at some point. And he was like, you know what happens if I write them down? I will have to shoot you. I said, okay, don't write them down. And so that was a good experience, and it also helped me a lot into understanding that I would have greater chances to be noticed if I'm, you know, one chicken with the red wing staying at home in Romania than becoming one Eastern European in a sea of Eastern Europeans going to US.
Bene, dopo questa avventura, l'ennesima avventura, il primo film, quello di esordio, era Occident, e invece arriviamo al 2007 e al film che ti ha consacrato definitivamente, al secondo film, quindi una cosa assolutamente eccezionale, e il film premiato a Cannes con la Palma d'Oro era 4 mesi, 3 settimane e 2 giorni. Un film epocale per me, perché racconta non solo la vita sotto Ceausescu, ma soprattutto cosa era la vita delle donne e il fattore umano che è sempre presente nel tuo film. In questo film veramente esplode e arriva in tutta la sua potenza.
Yes, the idea was that it's not so difficult for a filmmaker to make his first film. You want to show that you are smart, you have thought about this, and there's a lot of freshness and there are no risks. You wish to be noticed, but making a second film is something else. So I learned a lot of things after this first film, and I was thinking, okay, so what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And after that experience with my first film, I realized that I want to make sure that I will be more prepared with the second film. Meanwhile, I have traveled quite a lot in festivals with this first film. I don't know, the film went to 100 festivals. So I started learning more about what I did and about what other people were doing by reading and by watching. And so this helped me a lot before deciding what is my next film, to do something like the portrait of the description of the kind of film that I wanted to make. So before I had the story, I had written down what kind of film I want to make. And I knew from the beginning that I want to have a very small human story happening in 24 hours, speaking about some... It was easier when I ran across this story again to recognize it as the story for my film. Because this story from 4 months is something that I knew from when I was, young. And I never wanted to think about it too much. It was a little bit as it is for the characters in the film, very complicated and very personal. But then one day, looking for something painful, I think it helps. If you write a screenplay and it's painful for you when you write, well, you're on the good track. Because you try to defend all the time when you write. And I said, okay, this could be the story. And then I started using these 5 years in between these two films to also think about, you know, the ethics of your means in cinema. We had a little bit of a conversation about this today in the jury. It matters as much, you know, the story matter is as important as the means that you use as a filmmaker. And therefore, I decided that I will make also a short document about the style of the film, just to make sure that the film is going to turn out the way I wanted it to be. And I started asking questions to myself. Why am I making these choices when I make a film? Why am I cutting, for example? Is this something specific to film? Why am I using music? And what does it mean, the music? And I decided finally that I want to make a film in which my presence as an author would be as little visible as possible, given that, you know, cinema is really a very, very manipulative way of generating emotions. And my aim was to try to generate as many emotions as possible using as little mainstream means as possible. So I decided, okay, I won't use music, because music is a way of saying that, you know, the director waves to you, telling you, well, okay, now you should feel like this, or you should feel like this. And, you know, the crucial decision is that I decided that I won't use editing, because editing means the same thing. Every time you cut, you decide that the portion that you took off is not important. And, well, you know, it's a way of being very present in the film as a director. While what I wanted to do is to speak about something which I think is specific for cinema. Cinema is the only art next to music that can show how time passes on condition that you don't cut. You record a moment of time that you create, and then you screen it to people. So I decided that I will just use editing in between the scenes, and I will never do coverage, and I will never, see the scene from several perspectives. And this became, if you want, sort of my style from that moment onwards until today, because I couldn't find anything better. And then I even went further to creating a style for the camera, because, you know, you use the camera and you start asking, so who's seeing this? Who's seeing when you use the camera? And, you know, I decided that the camera should be a silent witness of a situation that records the situation from a distance, and we should never move the camera unless there's a necessity in the shot for that camera to move. I mean, when the camera follows a character, it can move, but not from your own will as director. I would never move the camera from you to somebody else unless I create some necessity in the shot. And so it became all of a sudden very difficult for us to apply all this, but it also brought a lot of it became a style which is very difficult, very dry, but somehow impressive to people and useful for the actors, because in longer scenes they can focus differently. It's very different for them. But it requires a lot of precision, and it requires a lot of choreography. It doesn't go the way people imagine. And because I spoke a lot, I would suggest that we have a small clip, and I would go with the 4 months, small clip, because this is going to show better what I'm talking about as style.
Să știți că de multe ori oamenii sunt mai cu bun simț și mai la locul lor decât mulți cu facultate.
Ai, iu, depinde acum și în ce mediu pui. Păi Dima ăsta, el la bază tot băia de la țară. S-a văzut la oraș, a intrat în partii, că avea origine străină.
Hai mai bine să
Dima, noroc, la sănătate, la mulți ani.
la mulți ani. La mulți ani și vouă.
Mulți ani.
Tu dai cu suc?
Mulți ani.
Am spus, dă-și tu ăla mai tare să vedem ce mai făcut prea înțelept.
Fiindcă nu înțeles de porc? Dragă, în familia asta e foarte greu să stai în bucătărie. Azi de mine nu mânca porc. Dacă vedea grăsimea în farfurie, oricât de mică era, nu mai mânca.
Valentin al nostru la fel.
Și în supă, dacă vedea că se stricoară o steluță de grăsime, ceva, gata, nu mai mânca. La fel pielița de la pui.
Știi că pielița nici eu nu mănânca, ea îngrașă.
Sau îi puneam tartină cu mușchiuleț la școală și el o dădea la alți copii.
Așa a fost ea sufletit.
Și aveam o ciudă pe el. Pentru că pe vremea aia nu aveam așa relație.
Aveam salariul 2280
Și stăteam la coadă pentru câte un kil de carne și câte 3 ore.
Ales eu.
Dumnealui făceam mofturi.
Copiii e bine să învețe cu greutățile de mici, că mai încolo nu ia lintă nimeni.
Așa e.
Pe mine mă trimitea cu vaca la păscut și îmi făceam lecțiile la lampă.
La tine era altceva.
Și eram 9 frați. Punea mama măliga în mijloc și cine apuca bine, cine nu, salut.
Dar tu ai apucat.
Cazuri și cazuri.
Nu, dragă, ăștia au fost morturoși toți în familia asta. Pe Grigore, când l-am luat, dacă nu-i făceam pireu cum îl făceam ăsta acasă, nu mânca.
Tot învăț are și dezvăț.
Și tu nu ți iese pireul cum e și al mamă.
Dar nu este bun.
Ei bine, hai că ți iese.
Deci el făcea într-un fel anume?
Vă zic ceva, tineretul de adus răsfățat.
Bunica punea și o lingură de lapte.
Să știi că și eu până la așa, cu generațiile.
Eu îi pun și las și puțină apă în care să fie cartofi.
Știi cum e, cum te obișnuiești?
La noi de unt nici vorbă. În schimb punea mama cartofi în mămăligă. O gustoșenie.
Al nostru mămălică să nu vadă.
Pe cine a învățat? Nici noi când eram tineri nu eram de acord cu părinții.
Nu le mai țineți poate că prea să învățați să le pice totul mură în gură. Uitați-vă la ei. Cămin, bursă, tata și mama au grijă de papa, frate.
E relativ, gândiți-vă numai la repartiție. Că dacă eu cine știe prin ce, că cel puțin la noi la medicină, păi acolo se îngroapă.
Eu nu înțeleg ce aveți dumneavoastră cu repartiția. Eu înainte să ajung la Roman am fost 8 ani la Cotnar. Și văd că e bine, m-am descurcat.
Vă rog eu să mai serviți.
Auzi, n-aș tău?
Nu mă așteptați pe mine să vă servesc eu, doamna doctor, ce vă mai pun.
Fetele, dacă n-au fost deștepte să se mărite în timpul facultății, ajung la stare, se mărită ori cu profesorul, ori cu popa.
Așa e.
Ori popa, cel mai des, e el mai mare mețip din sat.
Dar nu generaliza, dragă. Sunt și preoți cum se cade și fără de
Sunt excepții.
Majoritatea păpilor au toți video, telecolor și toată ziua dacă îi caut sunt ocupați. Ce-or fi ei ocupați?
Ei, cu ce sunt ocupați? Cu spovedanie.
Eu nu mă duc la biserică și am terminat-o, ne-am rezolat-o mai zi.
Rău faci.
Noi de Paști mergem. Poate să mă și aresteze, că...
Cine să te resteze, dragă?
Popa, dragă.
Să fac și eu acolo.
Asta mi-a ieșit o oră de Paști, că niciodată.
Nu râdeți că de la noi la spital, cu cine mă întâlnesc de Paște în biserică? Stătea frumos pitit după un stâncuțoneș.
Și s-a dus direct la el la Aurel și l-a întrebat, vreți carnețelul?
Nu, dragă, nu, dragă, i-am zis, așa că da, scoate carnețelul și...
Foarte bine, foarte bine.
El m-a luat cu mai Aurel, chestii dintre astea.
Secretar.
Noi am avut de Paști de la cumnată mea vopsea de ouă din Germania. Și de sărbători le-a trimis un marțipan, vai.
Mie anul trecut mi-au crăpat toate orele la fier. Nu știu ce Dumnezeu au avut.
Nu, mie știi ce frumos mi-a ieșit?
Cu vopsea până te crești, ok, e frumos. Eu îl dau cu un pic de ulei ca să lucească.
Eu le dau cu unt.
A, nu, cu vopseaua asta, german nu trebuie să le dai cu nimic. Am avut galben verde și portocaliu.
Și albastru.
Albastru am făcut din galben cu verde.
Iar culorile după ce le folosim le dă prin bloc.
I le-am dat lui doamna Alboană.
Uite că facem noi câte o pomadă.
Mersi. Te servesc o țigară?
Nu prea le schimb.
Hai, te rog. Și la ce sunteți studente?
La Politehnică.
Pe vremea noastră, cam băieți era la Politehnică și fetele la medicină.
Așa cum nu tocam așa.
Avantajul cu Politehnica asta e că nu te duci la țară. Și să lucrezi o viață întreagă în fabrică.
Și stai la cămin?
Da.
Câte sunteți în cameră?
Normal 4, dar eu m-am mutat cu o prietenă și acum stăm doar noi două.
S-a descurcat fata.
Foarte bine, ce să aștepte?
Nu vă supărați, domnișoară, mă iertați, domnișoară, dar eu, fată tânără să fumeze de față cu părinții pe acolo, eu...
Milian.
Ce e, măi? Ce e, măi? Eu aveam 43 de ani când s-a prăpădit tata, Dumnezeu să-l ierte, și nu fumam în fața lui, nu fumam.
Asta e foarte sănătos. Dacă tai că tu nu știa că tu fumezi.
Haide, adu și șampania din congelator.
Nu e, mă, că știa, e de respect. Păi da, s-au ajuns copiii să te sfideze în față. Valentina mea, cibreta, dar...
Cine desfidează?
Poate nu-i cuvântul potrivit, dar dumneavoastră înțelegeți ce vreau să spun. Eu, de exemplu, n-am fost de acord ca băiatul meu să nu facă armată. De ce să nu facă, domnule? Să facă, domnule, să vadă ce e viața, nu corcolit așa, că odată și odată trebuie să învețe să fii bărbat.
Așa e, că și doamna mea pe al nostru la fel face.
Ba, eu nu sunt de acord. Ce crezi că dacă stai acolo 9 luni și te îndobitocesc că ea la cap, ești mai bărbat?
Așa e.
Eu n-aș fi de acord cu copilul meu să sufere în halul.
Așa e.
Pentru ce?
Dar să-i vedeți pe cei cu 1 an și 4 luni. Vede capul lor, săraci.
Mă depinde și unde. Cel mai greu e la grăniceri.
Da, e frumos.
Nu, cel mai greu este la batalionul disciplinar.
Da, nu vorbim de
Ascultă-mă ce spun eu.
Uite că noi nu l-am scutit pe Adi pentru că n-a vrut taică, pentru că îl vezi, Doamne, are principii și uite, de-aia face băiatul chimie cu el.
Gina, nu vorbim asta la masă.
Frumoasă, dragă chimia. Uite, am să-l iau la mine asistent și o să vezi că o să-i placă.
Îl ținem un an acasă și mai dea o dată.
Nu știu cum poți să
O să dea acasă, învețe și pentru
Lasă,
Masterclass.
să facem șampania asta?
Da, gata, hai.
Asta e școala vieții. Școala vieții, nu mai e armată de atât dată.
Mulți ani trăiască, la mulți ani. Mulți ani trăiască, mulți ani trăiască, la mulți ani.
I chose this fragment because, you know, everything that I did later on in my cinema is connected to this, and it speaks a lot about both the subject matter, the topics, and also the style. So in this fragment of some 7 minutes, you have all the themes and topics which are connected with the topic of the film and which I tackle later on. This is about social classes under communism. This is about compromise that you do or you don't do. This is about this hardships of communism that made people act in a given way. But at the same time, the part which I think is valuable in this, it's not about what this is, it's about what it is not. It is the first time when I was instructing the actors to do things that you don't do very often when you work. So the film is a lot about the main character, who speaks very little, and about what she thinks why all these people have this small talk. So, and this is the most difficult thing to show in cinema, as you know, to show what somebody thinks about and to show what are the thoughts of somebody who doesn't want to be in the room. And the other thing is, on the other hand, it speaks a lot about our way of working, in the sense that normally, of course, when you bring a camera in the room, you want to see all your actors. It's normal. So in the first day of shooting, I had a wide shot in which I was seeing all the actors, and it didn't work out. And it didn't work out because the main character in the film was too small, and I couldn't have the right attention. So this somehow brought me to this idea that, you know, maybe I should question these ideas as well. Why do I want to see all the actors? Just because it's polite? Yes, but it's not good for the film. So from the first day to the next day, I just changed the lens and I focused to what was important, and half of the actors that I have brought for the scene were just speaking from off camera. And I learned little by little that if you want to shoot in very long scenes, your only freedom is to use the depth of field and to understand that you have to use the sound a lot, and there's a lot of off camera. You point out that the world of what you do is bigger than you just see, and that you're always subjective by working like this. And the other thing is that, you know, normally when somebody stands up at a dinner like this, you will just point the camera out to see the people. But yet again, why do you do this? We decided that we won't do this. It's just this portion of life that we want to focus on, and we focused on it. And then it speaks a lot about what is the inspiration for the cinema that you do and for the cinema that I did. Because, you know, a lot of filmmakers just take other films or cinema as the inspiration for what they do. And very often asked question is, what are the films that influenced you? While, you know, in my case, I started from observing the reality. And this was my first impulse for which I wanted to make cinema. We were watching the Romanian films of the 80s, and you know, they were very strange because of the censorship, let's say. They seemed to be with people, but still these people never talked the way we did and never acted the way we did in real life. Everything was very fake. So the first reaction that I was having was to say that, you know, if ever I can make a film, it's going to be like people do talk in life. It's going to be very different than this. Nothing like this ever happens. And the feeling was that it's not this difficult to do better than all these people making films then. And this was one of the engines that brought us, I mean, people of my generation, to this idea of having inspiration from reality directly. And if you start observing reality, it's very different than if you start from watching films. Films are already an interpretation of reality, somebody's point of view. It lasts just 1 hour and a half. While, you know, reality is very, very different. First of all, there are a lot of dead moments in reality. So, well, starting from there, you need to realize that it's good to let some dead moments in the film. Then nothing big happens in reality all of a sudden, or maybe something, and then there are a lot of dead moments. And then there's the rhythm in which things happen, and the way in which people talk. There's something that I don't like when I watch this kind of mainstream effective cinema. You know, everything serves a purpose in the film. There is no line, no moment which is not going to the purpose. Well, I don't think this is the only way of making cinema, because, you know, life is not at all like this. Life doesn't have a lot of sense. You just try to put 2 and 2 together to give it some sense. So this helps you in including, when you write a piece of dialogue, for example, a lot of nonsense that people use when they talk. And it's not because you like to speak about nonsense, but because this renders the feeling that this is very real, and these are real characters. And because, you know, together with all the small things that you say, you talk more about yourself than you imagine. About your cultural background, about your stereotypes, about your cliches, like, you know, here, where, you know, they all feel superior to this girl because they all come from an intellectual milieu, where it's just coming from the working class. And I thought that there is a complexity associated to this. So I started using this extensively and trying to see, and using this as a matter, how can I find something happening in everyday life that will speak not only about that incident, but would speak eventually about the state of the world today, the way we can see it, through the smallest thing that I can find.
Ecco, questo modo fortemente etico di affrontare il cinema era già presente nel primo film, in 4 mesi, 3 settimane, in maniera molto prepotente, e hai ragione nel dire che questa scena contiene tanti dei temi che poi svilupperà in futuro, no? A partire dal senso dell'isolamento, perché si vede benissimo che lei è sola e che ha anche un dubbio. Tu dicevi difficile filmare i pensieri, e invece noi sembriamo leggere i suoi pensieri. Ecco, quanto è difficile, dopo un film che ha vinto una Palma d'Oro, mantenere questo rigore morale, perché immagino che le pressioni siano state tantissime, e invece non hai mai deragliato rispetto alla strada, e anche i film successivi, Oltre le colline, Graduation, RMN, cioè Animali selvatici. Ecco, il tuo punto di vista è sempre così rigoroso. Come si tiene fede a se stessi?
It depends why you decided to make cinema and what matters more for you. And of course it was very difficult, because I have to acknowledge, looking back, that Palme d'Or changed my life, of course, somehow. You don't realize on the spot. You know, I will start with a very, very short story about how we get to get that Palme d'Or. Just to complete, I was telling you that after my first film, I was decided that next time I will be more prepared. I knew that I wanted to have a sales agent, that I wanted to have a press attaché. So, you know, and while filming this 4 months, I had the feeling that it's good. I never had this feeling again until today, that I'm shooting something which is good, that it's strong, it's going to be very strong. So again, I started planning how to act with this film, not having information as an insider of the world of cinema. So what I did, when the film was finished, I just burned some DVDs in, and I sent somebody to the festival in Rotterdam to help me again. And they helped me in the sense that they organized an informal screening with the film only for sales agents and distributors. And all of a sudden there was a rumor started to spread. So 2 weeks later, when Berlin started, actually people started knowing a little bit about the film. So I sent somebody, I bought a market badge, and I sent somebody with a DVD to give it to every other sales agent there. And of course, people were like, oh, it's a film. Oh, yeah, put it there on the shelves. Of course, nobody watched it. But it was a reminder that this film exists. And then a little bit later on, we got this news that the film was selected for Cannes. And when we got that piece of news, my phone started ringing for once, and all the sales agents in Europe wanted the film. I said, okay, so now we can talk for the first time. And I started talking to them, and everybody was, offering a bigger MG, a smaller MG, and I didn't care at all about the MG. And we were talking, and I remember that at some point I was talking to Wild Bunch, and Wild Bunch told me, we have a special relationship to Romania because, Van Samaraval has a little distribution company there. So the first time when we were going to represent a film in Cannes, we need to have all the time in the world. This year we have 8 films already that we expect, so we won't have the time, we will pass on the film. A lot of blah, blah, bullshit. So, okay, no problem, I have plenty of agents where to choose from. So, and eventually he called 2 weeks later, and he said, well, you know what, I don't have 8 films in competition, I just have 1. The others were not selected. So I would have time to work with you. And I said, well, I already advanced with a lot of conversation with these other people, it's a bit late. And he knew what to tell me. He told me, look, this is not a good film, this is a great film. So I will fight for this film, which is now, I can tell you, in uncertain regard, to go to the official competition, because you belong to be there. I said, yes, I do belong, yes, I really want to do this. So, okay, I'll work with you. And, eventually 2 weeks later, we were in competition, and we got to be friends, and, the film got the Palme d'Or, and some 5 years later, he came to speak in my festival in Bucharest, and he drank a little bit of something, and he told about the story again, and he said, of course, you cannot influence Cannes to take a film where they don't want to take it, but the time when I was talking to you, I knew the film is already in competition, so I could tell you that I will fight because I had the answer before. Okay, very good. But the idea is that we were beginners. In the 60th anniversary of Cannes, there were all the big names of cinemas, and Cannes decided to promote 1 or 2 filmmakers which were at the beginning. They have just made 1 or 2 films, but everybody was there. So Wild Bunch came back to me and they said, okay, we're beginners. We were giving either the first day of the screenings or the last day. What shall we have? I said, I have no idea. You pick up. And they said, okay, we'll have the first day. We will knock them. And this was a Thursday or a Friday in Cannes. During the weekend, everybody will forget about the film, but you have 2-3 days to have the interviews, get back home. This is it. And okay, we started, and indeed the reactions were very good to the film. And after Sunday, I was asked to stay on Monday and on Tuesday, and then to stay until the end of the festival. And eventually I ended up by having 8 hours of interviews all the way. And little by little, we started having the feeling that it was good and something good might happen. And finally, they told us that we need to stay for the awards, and said, wow, this is something. We were so happy. But at the same time, the pressure that we were talking about starting accumulating, because we were reading the press and we saw that we were considered to be like favorites also, or contenders for the Palme d'Or. And we were like, wow, dizzy. And, people back home started feeling that it may be, the great historical moment of the Romanian cinema. And for the first time, somebody in Romania decided to broadcast live this ceremony. It was my former boss from while I was working in television who sent the crew in Cannes to broadcast the whole thing live. And my former teacher from my film school was commenting this online. So the whole pressure was on me to do something. And I was very stressed out. And, you know, I missed completely the joy of the ceremony. When I got into the ceremony, something told me, and you have to say something when you get on stage. And I couldn't think all along during the ceremony to anything else, but what shall I say? I mean, what shall I say meaningful? Not to say, dear mom, dear dad, I'm so happy that I won. And to say, no, if you are given the microphone on the stage of Cannes or Venice, you have to deliver an important message to the world. Okay, so I was thinking about this, and we knew that we would have something, but you know, the Cannes, you know, the way they prepare the show is that, you know, there are some cameras, and just to fool you, there are some cameras coming to wait on you several times, and you just have to smile, not knowing if it's you or not, and you have to be very generous to applaud if somebody else won, and this kind of stuff. So eventually, I was very zen by the end of this ceremony because I was prepared for whatever it was to come. And, you know, I just came on the stage focusing on what I needed to say. And the fact that we won brought a lot of attention, not just to me, but to the whole Romanian scene which was emerging then, and which I have to say has emerged a few years before with some other filmmakers and some other films. And we all had to stand up to the expectations of this wave. And I proved this to be, I found it out that this is even more complicated than making a good film. And of course, as you can imagine, the next moment after you get the Palme d'Or, all the American agents would come to sign you and say, hey. And I met a lot of people, you know, representatives of great actors saying, you know, you just come there, you sit there. There's a book, there's a library of books that, you know, Harrison Ford bought. You just stay there and read and do whatever you want. It's very simple. So everybody was trying to talk me into moving over there, and I was thinking, and I said, well, you know, I remember my experience from 20 years before. I said, you know what, I've been there, I've seen these people, and if I come there, will I be able to make the films that I want, or will I make the films that the producer wants? And I said, well, you know, we'll see, but, you know, first come there. I said, well, you know, I won't for now. Send me something to read, and, you know, if I ever find something which is truthful and which suits me, I might join you. And I decided not to sign, not to go there, and I decided that I make cinema because what I do is very important for me from this artistic perspective, if you want. Because, you know, when we started making films in Romania, it was the worst year in the Romanian history for cinema, the year 2000. We couldn't produce any films. We had lost all the 600 cinemas that we had before the revolution, so it was the 0 year. And therefore, our ambition in cinema was not to make a big film with a lot of audience because it wasn't technically possible. So this switched our aim to checking out what are the borders of filmmaking. And I mean, you know, it sounds very bold to say this, but coming out of the film school, all of us were thinking about making a film for the history of cinema directly, not for the audience. Just checking out how can you, 100 years later, reuse the same language of cinema in a way in which is a bit different. And with this ambition, I decided that this is more important for me than just making money doing somebody else's film, and I decided that I will just follow the best ideas that I have about cinema, and it's more important to be truthful than to become famous or rich or whatever.
Grazie. Dobbiamo un po' correre e quindi lascerei per un momento il cinema per passare alla scrittura, agli altri pianeti che si muovono nel tuo universo. E appunto da poco è uscito anche in Italia questo romanzo che si chiama Una vita romena e che è dedicata alla figura di tua nonna, di nonna Tania, che è una magnifica signora nata nel 1916 in Bessarabia. Confesso che leggendo il libro ho dovuto andare a cercare Bessarabia perché non ne sapevo niente, colpevolmente, e non è solo la vita però di tua nonna, è la vita di tante nonne e di tante donne che hanno vissuto la tragedia di vivere in terre di confine e che vivono tutt'oggi in terre di confine.
Yes, as I said, I started by having a lot of trust in writing, and I was very, very close to my family. I was very close to my grandmother. It was a different kind of relationship. So I was growing up with my grandmother in the same house, and with my parents and my grandparents. So they were more or less taking care of us children. So it was a very close relationship. But as a child already, I was always aware that my grandmother was doing everything she needed to do, but she was also having this kind of permanent sadness. She was a woman in her 60s when I remember her as a child, and every time she was saying my home or home, she meant the house that she left back in 1940 when she had to flee to move on further into Romania. So, and I grew up with all this affection for my grandmother and all her stories. And then I needed to make a kind of a very important decision right after the fall of communism, in the sense that my parents have lived in the same house with their grandparents. And so there was the expectation that us children would live in the same house. But, things have changed. The revolution has changed everything, so now you could pursue your dreams. And me and my sister decided that we're just going to leave home. And this was a huge blow for the family. The idea that, it was a small paradise, if you want, where we were growing up. We had a huge house, a lovely garden, all the animals in the world that you could imagine. I have a lot of stories with animals, but I don't have the time today. And all of a sudden we decided to just go and live in Bucharest in a tiny room, but it was for our passion. And they understood. And then I started visiting my grandmother because I told her when I leave, leaving doesn't mean that I don't love you and I don't think about you, and I will try to get back to every holiday and talk to you. And so this is what I did. And little by little, she was growing old, and I was always very attached by older people getting to this age when, there's nothing much to change in your life. You reach that age where you look back and say, well, this is how my life was, maybe. I expected something else. So I was thinking, I care for this person that much, and what can I do for her? How can I change her life now when she's 70 into something nicer than it was? It was a life only full of hardships, so I can't change this. And I decided that if I talk to her and I tell her, whatever happen to you matters for us, matters for me, and I will make sure that this is not going to be lost. There's a process in fiction, not in fiction, in keeping memories that help people imagine that at least this might serve some purpose someday. And of course I used the idea that I was a student at filmmaking, and she thought, well, maybe we'll make a film out of it someday. I said, yes, maybe, yes, just tell me. So I started systematically to talk to my grandmother, and to write down everything she remembered about her life. And nothing was necessarily very coherent, bits and pieces about this and that. But I decided after I did all this that instead of just writing notes, I will write this as a book, as if, anybody else could read it. And I wanted to do this for my children, just to know the biography of the family. I was not having children. I was thinking long term. It's good to know. And for my grandmother, to make sure that we know her story. So I wrote this, I gave it to read. She was a bit, She was like, it's more organized than what I have told you, but yeah, very good. And this stayed in a drawer for some 20 years. Nothing happened with this. It was made with that purpose, and it stayed there. But then, sometimes after COVID, the war in Ukraine started. And when the war in Ukraine started, I accidentally ran into this publisher in Romania who asked me, what are you doing during COVID? I said, well, revisiting a lot of things, watching films, thinking about projects. And thinking about something that my parents and my grandmother always told me when we were young. If you live here where we live, it's a matter of time until the war will get back. So be prepared. The war will always get back. So just be prepared for that war. I remember this conversation from when we were young, and our father was trying to convince us to go to the medical school, saying, when the war comes, it's not that you won't go to fight this war, but as a doctor, you won't be the first to die. You'll be a little bit behind. And my sister went to the medical school. I tried to get to the medical school. And after the fall of communism, we all had this lovely period of some 10, 15 years in which it seemed that the world has become, a bit wiser. So, hey, maybe we're wise enough and we won't have wars that much in Europe and in the world. And it's not true that wars will get back to us. But eventually, when the war in Ukraine started, I realized immediately that their perspective, having crossed in their biography 2 different world wars, was actually the true one. You cannot live next to a big empire and imagine that this is not going to happen again. And, her story basically is a story of what is the decision that you are going to make when the war starts. And this reveals what were the values in which you invested all your life. Because you imagine that, in a critical moment, you are going to make a choice based on that moment. But actually, the choice has grew into you based on all the decisions that you made before. And in the case of this story of my grandparents, it's a very simple situation. So all of a sudden, because Romania and the Soviet Union at the beginning of the war were in opposite sides, we got this ultimatum from the Soviets asking all the population from this portion of Romania to just leave that portion in 24 hours because they are going to include that Basarabia, this portion of Romania, to the Soviet Union. So you can imagine people hearing accidentally this piece of news on the radio and having to decide all of a sudden what to do, to stay with their house, with their friends, with their families, or to leave. And if you leave, how do you leave? Can you take something with you in 24 hours or not? And this is a decision which marked all the generation of my grandmother, no matter what decision they made finally. In the case of my family, they decided first to leave, and then my grandmother couldn't leave, everything she has put together all her life, all her furniture and clothes and everything. It was overwhelming. So they decided to stay. And that was the end of the family since they stayed. My grandfather was arrested, my grandmother's brother was shot, my grandmother was sent to Siberia, and only my grandmother survived and she could pass over. So I thought that then it was the moment, together with the war in Ukraine, to maybe have this publicly and have this as a book. And I published the book back home in Romania. And then the book was later on translated into French and now into Italian. And I think that, of course, yes, it's partly because meanwhile I made a career in cinema, and this, of course, helped this text to become a book, but also because it speaks about something very, very actual. And it speaks about how this, realities of being a small person in a big world where history with a capital H, history doesn't care about you. History just goes on, and all of a sudden you find yourself trapped in a territory, as my grandparents did, in which living in the same place, they were shooting in 2 different wars in opposite directions because the border was doing like this. So these things are bigger than your will. And I think this is very actual, and this is why I decided to do this. And also the other thing, what I liked about the effect that this book had on people is that it made a lot of people who were listening to me talking about this book make a phone call to their parents or grandparents at the end of this conversation. Mm-hmm. Because I keep telling people, you take this for granted when you're young, that, you have time to talk with your folks. You have time, but you don't have time. They will die before you make this choice. So, as soon as you get out, try to talk with the ones that you care. And don't imagine that we all take for granted that, I'm not going to die tomorrow. Well, who knows? Who knows? Do whatever you have to do today.
Ecco, credo che la storia che ha alle spalle la Romania, cioè di accoglienza di altri popoli, appunto come i Bessarabi, che sono stati costretti a lasciare la loro terra, sia anche uno dei motivi per cui la Romania è il paese che più ha aperto le frontiere agli ucraini dopo la guerra, no? Siete stati il paese europeo che si è più offerto di accogliere.
There are 2 things here. So first of all, Romania has a very special geographical position. I have a film project about this. It was the only socialist country who happened not to have any border with the Western country. We are just surrounded by Eastern countries. And then the other thing is that when the war started, we were, way more affected than everybody living a bit further, because we experienced this danger of the war way differently than you can here or in France or wherever. We know that the only cushion between us and this former Soviet Union is Ukraine, which is in this moment, helping us a little bit and helping the Republic of Moldova a little bit. So we take this very personally, this war. If Soviet Union is going to win this, well, there's not going to be, you don't want to have this at your border. You never know where this is going to happen. So it became a very important matter for us, and it still is today. We experience this very differently. And the level of stress in society grew exponentially once this war started, and several people decided to just go and not to wait for that moment, just go.
Vogliamo brevemente parlare anche della tua attività di produttore e anche hai anche creato questo festival, per poi lasciare spazio alle domande?
I will be very short because I spoke a lot. And I had prepared a lot of films, out of which I just managed to screen one. So I'll be very short about the other things that we do, in the sense that, after my experience with that producer who was selling dirt for flowers, I decided that I was making all the production for that film, so I will create my own production company since I was doing that job. And I created the production company for my films. And, not understanding that the moment you create a production company, you become, the servant of this production company. It starts consuming means, so you have to, nourish it all the time with something to do. Then you have this idea one day that you need a secretary. The moment you need a secretary, you are, the prisoner of this. You have your first employee, so you need to give this person something to do, and then you need a driver, and then you need somebody else to work with you. So little by little, I never wanted to become a producer, but I wanted to just make my films. But little by little, I ended up by learning how to do this, and by doing this, eventually for some other people, just make this company exist when I want to make my films. And I was always very, very concerned about the whole picture of cinema next to me. Because yes, I was lucky, I was making short films, I was making feature films, but I knew that we missed the cinemas. So you make films, but you cannot screen the films. I did something very special with 4 months. All of a sudden, there was a lot of interest about that film because it was the first Palme d'Or in Romania, and people wanted to see the film. So I got back after Cannes, and I realized that we have 40 counties. From the 40 counties in Romania, only 20 counties had one single screen cinema. So I couldn't reach people. So I did something. I was quite popular then, and I got all the possible keys of my hometown and medals from the president and stuff like this. And even my telephone company, they bought a page just to congratulate me and all this stuff. Everybody was trying to get a little bit of attention. So I could fundraise, and I organized a caravan. As a caravan from, as you can imagine, a caravan from the 30s or 40s or 50s in Italy. I brought a truck full of material from Germany with a screener, a projector on 35, it's still the time of 35, and everything that in a screen. And I created a tour in the country for 30 days to screen this film in all the big cities where there was no cinema. And we had, I think, 20 or 30,000 people, something between, only from these screenings. And I thought that this is going to become like an example for our politicians about the lack of infrastructure in cinema. And, we proved through this film that we did what we could to put Romania on the map of cinema. So now we waited for, the politicians to do something and help us out and eventually create a system. But this never happened. Instead, my you know, this extreme example of organizing a caravan became the norm. So everybody now takes care of his own film by organizing a caravan and screening the film, because now we ended up by having a lot of screens in multiplexes, but we lost all these old, let's say, art house films. And if you go to a multiplex, it's not the place for this kind of cinema that we do. You know, if you have a couple of adolescents at 7 o'clock in the evening, they are never going to pick up the most difficult art house film. They will go for something else. So this made me involve a lot into the whole world of cinema in Romania, but in Europe as well. I was spending a lot of time in Brussels trying to adjust the legislation, change the legislation. And back home, I spent a lot of time into the rewriting the cinema law, and I ended up by making a couple of festivals just to bring the audience back. And after the festivals, I decided that I can as well, you know, create a distribution company. So I started buying films and showing films, and now I am on the point of, you know, opening a cinema in Bucharest. So unfortunately, I had to spend a lot of time to just bring back the interest to cinema. And, well, you know, it's problematic because your time is limited, as you can imagine. And while doing all these things, I was doing my films and taking care of my children as well. So it's quite, you know, overwhelmed by everything that I need to do.
Grazie. Vorrei già capire se c'è qualche domanda da parte del pubblico, dei nostri... Ecco, ce n'è già una.
The microphone is coming.
Ah, e poi ce n'è anche un'altra qua davanti.
Hi there, I just wanted to ask, you said about using minimal camera movements to try and sort of recreate as much of reality as possible. Why, for you, do you find it easier to do that with a handheld camera than shooting on a tripod?
There are two things about how we use the camera. So one of them regards, I mean, what we try to do is to allow the camera to follow the temperature of the scene and the rhythm of the scene. So we move the camera a lot, for example, if it's a very dynamic scene of action. And I have shot several action film scenes in just a single shot, running around with the camera, but staging this in such a way in which the camera can follow what happens, but rendering the same feeling of urgency. We decided pretty much early in this way of filmmaking that a tripod is a little bit, you know, less human than just handling the camera. It might be subjective, but it corresponds to a way of framing which is not very natural, if you want. You don't have this steadiness in life. It's much more, if you imagine a person looking over here and there and moving, I think that the camera slightly moving is closer to reality in this sense of decision-making than a still camera. Still, as we were advancing, you know, in my mind about my style of shooting, nowadays, for example, I move the camera very little if the situation is very static. I don't move it too much. I don't fix it, but I don't move it too much because it's still important that you don't perceive it. The most important thing with this style is to focus on what happens in the shot. And the difference between this style of shooting with just very long takes and have all the action in one shot and using editing is that I create a moment of reality, which is fictional reality, but it's still reality. Some people speak. And then I record it. I don't recreate that moment through editing. I create it in front of the camera. And the ethics of this way of working says that even if it's difficult for you to create a long moment, you need to create it. Because, you know, you can't make your life easier just because it's difficult. So this is how I end up by evolving from this film in which I had this shot of 7 minutes to this shot in RMN when I have 22 speaking characters in a 17-minute shot. And as you can imagine, that's not easy to do. And I think, well, should I cut? I said, well, no, I need to see if I can do it because it respects, all these things that we have come up with, as that it's more truthful to do it like this. And for that one as well, we need to make a lot of difficult choices. Whenever you have this situation of people talking to one another, they will face each other. So there isn't a position of the camera where you can have everybody. You have to make some choices. So I decided that for the 17 minutes of the shot, some of the people talking would just be off camera. This is it. You focus on what's more important, and this is it. And this was a quite static camera. It was a static camera starting on these people here, talking on this other side, so you see them, and then the camera was following a character going into the theater, it was a reunion, and then it stayed there. After it stayed there, nobody was moving any longer, so the camera was very static. And nobody notices this necessarily, but what matters is that it's consistent to our ethical of working.
Hi. I have a question about your newest project, Fjord. It's your first international production in English, I believe, or in Norwegian. What was the reason for setting it in Scandinavia?
Mm-hmm. Actually, it doesn't differ too much from my way of reaching a story. I start a lot from things that I have read in the press. I think a lot about these things which made news, and I try to figure out after a while if they can speak about something more general than just that specific situation. And it's the same thing here. It is a story that happened originally in the Nordic countries, or there are several stories if you want, several stories of these encounters between people coming from a different culture, from the south and east, and moving up north, in a north that I see a lot like, the most progressive part of Europe and of the world. If you go up there, you will see that all the progressist ideas that we're having are expressed to a different level than anywhere else. So I thought that I could make a story about this clash of values by starting from these original stories that I have documented. So I followed the same pattern that I used for my previous films. It's just that this time the story was set naturally there, and it's still a story of some people speaking Romanian but who happen to live there. And actually the locals speak Norwegian normally and the Romanians speak Romanian. It's just that they use English as a language of communication. So yes, we could say that it's a little bit of a more international project because English is used in it, but it's not like this kind of The Pianist, for example, where, the Polish people were speaking in English about, it's still very realistic and very natural.
Good. Thank you so much, Cristian, for this wonderful and enlightening masterclass. And what a joy to have some storytelling after watching all these films. I've got two questions. One is if you could talk a little bit about your approach to casting and to working with actors. I imagine you rehearse a bit about all of that. But I was also wondering, how do you balance writing, directing, and producing, and all the other things you do in the realm of producing that tend to require such a different use of our persons and of our minds? Thank you.
Well, as you can see, I can act somehow. I interpret my dialogues. So therefore, my process starts from this. I think that I know where I want to go. So my aim in film is when you listen to the dialogues, it should be as if you overhear people speaking in the next room. You shouldn't be able to say these are lines from a film or just people talking. And I tried to write my dialogues in this direction. I developed a capacity of writing down dialogues in the way people talk, not very coherent, in a very oral way. I went to the end of this process in Beyond the Hills, which was spoken with an accent, with a regional accent. So I wrote from the beginning with that accent, misspelling everything. That was a very difficult project, screenplay, to read. You couldn't understand much. But this is the way people speak. And then I have a kind of a method in casting. You know, there's something about my film school. Nobody taught me systematically in my film school anything precisely about directing. Not how to work with an actor, not how to write, not how to do the casting. We were making short films and talking about them, but nothing was systematical. So in the casting, what I do, I'm asking this guy with whom I'm working to show me all the characters which are within that range of age. So every time, for every film, if I have a 25 years old girl, I see all the actresses from 20 to 30, hundreds. And I make some batches of pictures, some folders. I believe a lot that our face speaks a lot about our personalities. Of course, you may be wrong, but overall, I'm not this wrong. So I watch all these people, and I create like 3 folders of pictures. The most likely, those which are possible, and some other people, which, you know, if we're desperate, we're going to see this one as well. And in this third batch, my casting agent can add whomever he wants, people that he has seen, and he tells me, yeah, you should see this person. Okay, put it there. And then I start seeing the people in the first batch directly myself, and eventually in the second folder. And he starts seeing people in the third folder. And when I see them, I have 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to work with them, and I work with them directly on the dialogue in the film. I have 10 minutes, first of all, to get to know them. So I'm like, I don't know, like a shrink, a psychiatrist that has 5 minutes to know you because he has to save you. So I will ask them a lot of personal questions. So, are you straight or gay? Do you have a boyfriend? How do you live? Well, from acting, you know. You can't be living from acting and stuff like this. And so we establish a very direct and close relationship from the beginning. And then we start reading directly the dialogue in the film. And actually, I let the actor read his part, but I tell him from the beginning, after you read your part and I read my part without any comments, I will read your part. So, and I read his part all the time, because by reading his part, I give him a much more precise dimension of what I want from him without using words. Because words, when you describe what you want, are very abstract, you know. What would you say? I mean, the worst thing that you can say to an actor is be natural. Oh my God, poor guy, he knows he wishes to be natural, but how? That's the issue. How can I help you to be natural? And I have this small test with the actors that I'm casting. If they come into the room and I tell them a few things, and they don't know if these are the lines from their text or this is what I'm saying, then this is what I'm asking them to do. And I can do this very easily, you know. I can always act my dialogues in such a way in which you don't know if I wrote them or... And therefore I can ask them to do the same thing. Because the difficult task is not to do this well while you read this and on the casting, but little by little to know this so well so that you don't focus on the text. You start focusing on the subtext. Every line of dialogue comes with the subtext and the context. If you are that kind of an actor that needs to have an explanation about what is the subtext, we can talk, and I can tell you. If you don't, and you can already say it, I won't insist. So I adapt to every other actor, and then there's another stage. After I see everybody and I choose people who are closer to this, I start reading just with the actors. They start reading together, and then there's another stage in we move to a set. And little by little, I work with the people who are the closest to the ones that I imagine in my mind when I was writing, but not physically. Physically, they can be very, very, very different, and I can adapt. What they render in terms of charisma, what they render if they are truthful, this is what I'm interested in. And, you know, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're But I was right, pretty much. Yeah, you know, happily I was right most of the time. But you know, for example, there's one moment when I wasn't right. For 4 months, for example, I was having 2 different actors for this bad guy, this Mr. Very guy, and I didn't know who to choose, and I was doing this kind of readings with them, and one of them was remembering the text all the time, and the other one was very good, but he stopped all the time. And I said, look, we're going to have 6 pages of dialogue. You need to remember this, and you cannot, sorry, but we will work for some other film later when you have shorter portions. And I went for this other guy. But eventually, a few years later, I asked this guy to come back again. I worked with him just to notice that he was having a lot of emotions when you're rehearsing, but as soon as you clapped, he remembered everything, and he could deliver whatever. But, you know, this is the way you choose and how you can choose. On the other side, to answer the other part of the question, yes, as you can imagine, between your creative mind used to write and your organizing mind used to manage companies, to organize the production, I don't know, there are different sides of your brain, but somehow I learned to do both of them at the same time. I mean, I had to, I don't like this, but I had to. So, you know, I'm still somebody reading my own contracts. I don't have anybody to read the contracts better than me. I understand what people want, I understand what I want, so I don't want to do this, but I will read the contracts prior to signing them. And there's a benefit in being your own producer in the way I work. For example, for this last film that I made, you know, I started knowing that we're on the limit of the budget, and I insisted that, you know, people handling the production cut whatever they can, and you know, it's very easy to say, well, where should we cut? We can't cut from anywhere. I said, yes, but we're on top of the budget. I don't want to be on top of the budget. I said, well, we will find some more money. So I cut. During the shooting, I cut 4 days of shooting myself while shooting. I reorganized things because it was the only thing I could do while shooting, so I got back into the budget. Not endangering the film, but knowing how to do this and being conscious that the production side exists as well, and I was capable of doing this. Actually, I think that it's not good that I spend so much time organizing things. It would be ideal if I spend more time thinking about my projects, but it's a thing that I'm trying to better and to, I don't know, improve for the last 10 years. It's not this easy.
Abbiamo spazio per l'ultima domanda, una breve domanda e breve risposta, ahimè.
So I'm gonna be reading from my phone because this question is not actually from me, but from a friend of mine who's writing his thesis, bachelor's degree thesis about you. So hopefully this helps him in this work. So of course he's seen all of the possible masterclasses and interviews you did on the internet, and he's mentioned a masterclass from 2014 where you speak about how you find the inspiration from your stories and try to reflect on those inspirations and try to understand what the story can talk about and what aspects of life it can put some light on. And of course, starting a lot from news stories. And he wanted to ask, what's the process of starting from stories from the news, from real life, and fictionalizing them to speak about something about life?
Where is this guy from, or girl?
He's from Milan. We actually already met in Milan.
From Milan, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I keep getting a lot of stories on the Instagram. I just got a story a few days ago from somebody making a thesis on my films in Iran. It's a very funny story close to this. Actually, this guy is having a dispute with his master professor because he wrote a very, kind of a philosophical paperwork about the meanings coming out from my films. And his teacher tries to convince him that this is just his interpretation. I couldn't have possibly thought about all this beforehand. So he asks me a question saying, hey, can you please tell me? I said, okay, look, I'm going to do something. When I write a screenplay, I write tens of documents on the side. And when I advance with the screenplay, I advance with the narrative at the same time with another document, which is the meaning of what the story is about. I have two different vectors. The advancement of the story, what happens, and the advancement of the meaning. What does it mean? What am I talking about? I need to be very clear about this all the time, because my experience is that if you are not clear, there are two ways of filmmaking. You will just shoot, edit, and see what the film speaks about. And there is this other way of shooting in which I want my film to speaking precisely about the things that I have thought before. And you have to double check this all the time. So I'm quite organized, and I try to translate however I can in words the meaning of what this could be. And very often, so example for RMN, that's a story that, so for Beyond the Hills, let's say, that's a story that existed in the whole place. It was a story about this very little educated people who were trying to save this girl and perform this kind of extracting the devil out of her, and she died. Okay, so very sensational story. I needed years to understand that, that film speaks about empathy, and it speaks about the difference between religion, church, and superstition, which are different things, and it speaks about our society today and about what's better. Is it better to have a society lacking empathy at all and letting people to die because they don't care? Or is it better to have, believers who try to help people but don't have the right rational means to do so? Actually, none of them is good enough, but it gave me the opportunity of understanding that I speak about love in this context. And for example, for RMN, if people don't see the film like this, RMN had a very interesting starting point. In a small village in Transylvania, a small community decides that, of a minority, decides that they don't want foreign workers there. But how do they decide this? They get into a space like this and they vote democratically. We don't want people here. And when everything comes out, because they are very naive and they record this meeting and they place it on the internet, when people see this, they are going to be considered all of a sudden, the pole of xenophobia in Europe, and they don't understand why, because they are only more honest to speak aloud things that everybody on the right wing thinks. And I thought that this is a very good film speaking about the limits of democracy. Because, democracy is nothing unless you have invested priorly the time and energy to educate people. You might ask for their opinion, but it's not going to bring the right results. And this is not coming right away, this kind of interpretation. You have to think about that story, and I start tackling such stories only when I have the right answers. And little by little, thinking about that story, I realized that, every other story that I'm making, it's about, human nature, and about the state of the world today, even if it sounds, And I'm trying all the time to have this as a mirror in front of the people watching the films, telling them, actually, I make stories about yourself. You just have the comfort to be in the blackness of the theater, but as soon as you get back home, think that it's about yourself and double check again what your opinions are about the state of the world today. And before waiting for somebody else to make the world better, try with yourself. You make a progress.
Grazie, siamo arrivati alla fine di questa ricchissima masterclass. Grazie a Cristian Mungiu per la sua generosità. Grazie davvero.